Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. On the lift today we got a 2002 Kawasaki ZRX-1200R. I always liked this bike a lot. You know, that Kenny Lawson look, you know? I really like the color and I like the lines. I could live without all the chrome and farkling, but that's not my bike, so I'm not going to say much more about that. So anyway, this is what it's in for. It's not running exactly right. Now if I haven't done so already, I'll slip some clips in here. I'm going to slip it in where I show it running, and the customer's primary complaint is that on deceleration it backfires like a mofo. It really backfires a lot on decel. So I just took it for a quick shake up and down the road. It's all I could really do because it's Saturday. This Muzzy is not quiet, so I didn't want to go too cray-cray. So I just took it up and down the road and got it, you know, first, second gear, let off on the throttle, and I really don't hear it popping at all. But when you sit here and run it, again, I'll put a clip in here if I haven't done so already. It's fiddling, you know, flubbing, I guess would be the word, and it's breaking up a little bit, so it's probably what he's hearing on decel. I'm guessing it's probably more prevalent when it's hot, when it's up to full operating temperature. This is liquid cooled, so we don't have to worry about air cooled bullshit, and it's nice to work on more modern carbs that don't require a service fuel level, they just have a regular float level. These are Keihin CVKs. I don't know the size of these. I guess they're probably 30 mil or so, 32s, I'm not sure. And of course, a more modern generation with a throttle positioning sensor or TPS, which we'll check the function of as far as the resistance, because we're gonna have to pull the carbs. This is a fuel issue. There's a couple other things we're gonna do on the bike as well. It needs skins on the front and the back. The day code on this guy is 2003. And the day code in that guy is 2004. These are Michelin Pilot roads, nice tires, but 20-year-old tires is a no bueno. He wants new tires put on, and so that's what I'm going to do. But I'll do that off camera. I'm not going to film any of that. That'll be done later. What I'm going to put on camera here is we're going to try to diagnose this and figure out what's going on. I'm thinking, based on the fact that this probably sits for 8,000 years at a time, there's probably some cruddy gas in here. I haven't sniffed the tank yet, you know, done the sniff test. Probably some crap in the carbs, synchronization issue, and or jetting issues. I don't know who jetted this. We have aftermarket pods on here. These are the K&N brand. These are nice ones. These are hard to find now, I've found nowadays. So we got the K&N pods. We'll clean these and re-oil them because they can be cleaned and re-oiled, and then diagnose and figure out what's going on. A couple of thoughts, rather, on what the cause could be. Number one, we've got a vacuum actuated petcock, and you know how I love those. But with that comes a vacuum hose that comes off of 1 or 2 carbs. That could be a vacuum leak issue. First glance, the carb holders look okay. The other issue you can have is these carbs have some sort of a air cut valve. I'll go on the other side, I'll show you. You can see the one on number 1 carb. I believe the air cut valve is behind here. Here's a vacuum line going to it. I don't know where this goes to, if either into a central. I'm assuming all 4 carbs have an air cut like that. I'm not 100% sure. These K-ins usually have an air cut valve, which, you know, I'm not 100% sure what the air cut does, but I know it has something to do with enriching on deceleration, so it doesn't pop, or something like that. And these can be in a couple of different variants. This kind with a more pronounced cover, more of a flat cover, or like on the Valkyries, that separate black plastic thing with the O-rings, that's an air cut valve with a vacuum line going to a vacuum hose. Pretty sure that's what this is, and I'll have to look it up in service manual. We're going to go ahead and pull a tank, and then we'll get in here and take a closer look and see what's going on with vacuum hoses. Because if I find some bad vacuum lines, I'll replace them and we'll try it. I might solve the problem. I'm not going to go too deep. I'm going to go step by step on this, bring you along. So let's get right to it. Oh, baby. Get out of here. Get this tank out of here. Thanks for the memories. Oh, it was terrible. All right, so here we go. Let's take a closer look. Here come the flicker effect. Here is the plug for the throttle positioning sensor. It's just a 3-wire sensor. But at first glance here, don't see nothing terrible. What I also look at on these TPS bikes is whether or not the TPS screws look like they've been fudged with. And these look pretty much pristine. Yeah, they look pretty pristine. Now there's safety torques. You can see the little nipple in the middle of them. You said nipple. That's how you adjust these. If there is any adjustment at all, I don't know. I have to look at the service manual. Some of them are adjustable, some of them are not. This is a carb vent here. No biggie. We don't have any external fuel leaks I can see from the T's, so that's good. I'm going to take that that air cut valve off on number 1 because I can get at it. And let's examine that valve. If that rubber thing in there is all folded up and deteriorated, I can almost guarantee you that that's going to be a major part of this problem. And if that is the case, then not only the rack has to come off the bike, we got to split the rack because there's no way to get at the other ones because they're too close to the neighboring carburetor. Let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. I'm right and I'm wrong. These are definitely air cut valves according to the parts fish, but there isn't 4 of them. There's only one on number 1 and not one on number 4. And the vacuum goes over to its neighboring carb. Comes off the exact same spot. It's really hard to see. And I don't really know how this works, but you can see a little bit of that vacuum line right there. And it just comes over and goes down to there. Same on number 4. I don't know how these work. You got me on that one. But at any rate, I know that's what it is. And I know that its function, well, I believe at least its function is, from what I read, is to richen up that circuit on decel. Cutting the air down in such a way where it's a little richer on decel. So let's go ahead and pop this one off. There's going to be a spring and a little O-ring in here. I just want to take a gander at it. Now, if I had to replace these, all I'd have to do is pop number 4 away from number 3, which I could do. But I'd still have to get the O-rings and stuff for it to reseat it. But you can feel that little spring in here. I'm just curious to see what it looks like. If it looks perfectly fine, then we're not going to go that route. There's a little O-ring. That looks pretty good. Okay, here's the cover. Here's the spring. There's a little air passage in here. It's pretty standard stuff. Down here you can see the diaphragm itself and a little O-ring. And that looks pretty good, actually. I'm happy to see the way that looks. Ooh, that's stuck. Felt like it was stuck. If it was stuck, then that would be a problem. With that, see, you know what? There's some crud on this or something. I think it was stuck because when I went to pull that out, that center did not want to move until I got a little bit more force on it. And now it's been removed, it just comes right out. We may have to do this, and I'll just have to replace the fuel T at least between 3 and 4. But we'll have to do that on the bench later. But this may need some attention as far as at least cleaning this off so you know they're moving. Because if they're not moving, that's part of the problem right there. I'm going to put it back together for now off camera, and then I guess the best thing to do would be just pull a rack, because we're going to have to flip this, drain it, flip them upside down, and check what's going on in here anyway over on the bench. But that gives me an idea. You see how it's another thing too, when I first started touching this, I don't think it was bouncing like this at all, which it should. It was like solid. These may have been stuck. That may be the whole issue. You guys seen me pull 1,000 racks, so I'm going to do all this off camera. All right, so I think I mentioned something about the air cut valve, and I already talked about that, but I made a couple of mistakes on that I want to clarify because I was making some assumptions. Now, number 1, there's only 2 of these actual valves. There's one on number 1 carb and then one on number 4 carb. The one on number 4 carb, I think I mentioned before, of course, is buried inside here. You can see it now. It's right there. So you'd have to split the rack, I think I mentioned before, to get that one out. I'm going to end up doing that, and I'll explain the detail on that here in a second, how that kind of all worked out as far as parts go. How this gets its vacuum is obviously from this circuit here. This is number 1 carb. You can see there's a little O-ring we saw underneath that, and there's a little circuit, and this circuit comes to the intake side of the carb, and it gets vacuum from that. I honestly believe that this air cut valve was sticking. When I went to pull it out, it just didn't want to come and then pop. So that little plunger in there, I think, was sticking. If that one was sticking, I think this one's sticking over here. So we're going to end up splitting number 4 carb off and we're going to clean that up and put it back in. I probably have little tiny O-rings for it, but they're probably not going to be necessary because I do have a bunch of Keihin little tiny O-rings like that. But speaking of O-rings, in order to do this, I'm going to have to split this carb, as I said. And so here's the fuel joint that goes between 3 and 4. So we're going to need fuel joint O-rings. Now I look up the OEMs on this, and they do not sell it with O-rings broken out on the parts fish, only the fuel joint itself right here. I did check my other go-to places for carb kits, O-rings and such, and unfortunately came up dry. So if you look at the fuel joint right there, you can see that looks a little familiar, doesn't it? Remember, these are Keihins. It kind of looks like the fuel joints from the ZX-10. Remember we did that machining project to make aluminium ones? Well, I'm thinking to myself, if these are the same joints, at least these between the end carbs, then I know I can get individual O-rings for those because they are broken out on that parts fish. Now it looks a little long, but we're not going to use the joint. All I did was measure it. So I took my calipers here and just measured across the flats, and it came up with a dimension, and I measured this one, and they're the same dimension across the flats. It stands to reason that these are the same size overall for the O-rings, grooves that is, and you know, probably the inside diameter too. So I'm thinking I can just order a bunch of the O-rings for these fuel joints, which is what I did because they got them in stock at Partzilla. And so I said, what the hell, that's going to work for me. So that I believe is taken care of. And the float bowl gaskets are taken care of too, which I'll kind of go over here too. And I don't have, unfortunately, none of my carb fixturing will work on these carbs. And I'm not making another one right now, so I'm going to have to do it old school and roll them around the bench. Typically, when I take these apart, but these float bowl gaskets, as you can see, I took off in number 4. Normally, I replace these out of good practice. Now, these are not in terribly bad shape. They seem to be a little bit proud of the float bowl itself, but I never ever trust them. They've been in there any length of time at all. I really like to replace these because they just leak, you know, if they're pressed down a little bit. I said, let's just see if we can order 4 of those, see how much it would cost. So it would be like 60-something bucks for 4 of these damn things, OEM. They are broken out on the parts fish that way. And I said, screw that. And then I thought about it and said, wait a minute. At the Dania Beach bike show last year, I bought a crap load of carb kits. This particular carb kit is a K&L 182676, and it's the KAW, cow. Doesn't say for Keihins, but I pulled one of these out. It's the exact right float bowl gasket. And I have 2 sets of these, so that's pretty cool. So I'm pretty sure, like I said, this is probably the same size O-ring as the ZX-10. It takes 6 of them to do the whole rack, which I'm not doing, but I ordered 8 of them because I want a whole rack set in stock. And I'll just use 2 out of those 8 for this end here, this guy right there. I'm not going to worry about the vacuum, or the vent rather. The vent, it's insignificant compared to the fuel, of course, and I probably have some of those. So we'll just deal with those, and we're going to pull this one carb off. We'll take a look at that air cut. So the other possible cause for this would be the O-rings on the fuel screws, and we can pull one of those out and see how it looks. If it's all flattened out and shit, then that's a good possibility. So what we're going to do about that is whenever I take these out as well, because I'm going to clean all these slow circuits, so I'm going to take them out anyway. But those O-rings, I like to replace them as good practice as well. They are not broken out, again, on this particular bike's parts fish. You have to buy the screw itself and the spring. It comes with an O-ring and a little washer. And those are pretty expensive too, and they only have 2 in stock. So I said, screw it. Again, I went back to the ZX-10 parts fish. I figured Keihins, probably the same damn fuel screw. I ordered 4 of those, so I'm pretty sure those will work fine in here. But let's take one out and see what it looks like. Oh, you know what? I didn't check that. Let's check where these are first. I forgot to do that. These are all 2 turns out. This one is half, 1, 1.5, 2. Do number 2 and see that. 2. They're all set at 2, I bet. 2 of them are, then the other 2 are probably set there too. Which doesn't seem like a whole lot for a setup where you have pods and an exhaust. So that could also be participatory that the fuel screws are not out enough. I would have set them for at least 3.25, if not 3.5 in this setup, or maybe at least 3. So there's, you know, these look exactly like the ones from the ZX-10. I would bet you my, I'm not going to bet you my ass because it's cracked and it's got a hole in it, but I would bet other stuff that that is probably the same dang O-ring and washer that is in the other Keihins from the ZX-10. But I can get this out. Yeah, see how nasty that is? It's kind of cupped, and it's, I seriously doubt that's working pretty well. I mean, that's really in bad shape. It's distorted, still a little pliable, but it sure don't look good. The other thing we do is put it around here. It really should be a very snug fit on the body of this screw, and it is sort of, but it is sort of not, you know. It's kind of loose, so you know, this could be the source of an air leak at high vacuum, highest vacuums when the throttle is closed, of course, especially under deceleration. So I would say we're definitely going to replace these. They don't look that good. Of course, I dropped my flashlight and the lens flew out of it, but it appears to be still working. Here's another indicator of what's going on. You can see that the end of this fuel screw is all gunked up with crap. So that would be suggestive of that slow circuit being probably in similar condition. All right, curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't help myself. Here is the fuel joint that's between 3 and 4. There's your O-rings, which look pretty flat. And there is the fuel joint from the ZX-10 down below it. So as you can see, they're pretty much identical, if not identical. So I can tell you right now, let me pull one of these off and I'm going to measure the inside of it there just to make sure, but I'm fairly confident that this is the right deal. And when you take these off, I've said this many times before, use like a piece of plastic, like a plastic pick. This thing will focus, it will be helpful. There you go. Now you cook something underneath it. This is actually a pick out of the Valkyrie kit from Red Eye Technicals. Okay, so this is the one that came off of the ZRX-12. We'll measure that center section, that where the O-ring goes. That's 240 thou. This is the one off of the ZX-10, 238 thou, 37 thou, so virtually the same. The width of the O-ring groove is a little difficult to measure with those calipers, but you can see from here they're pretty much the same. So yeah, those are the same fuel joints and thus the same O-rings. So this is a perfect example of, in my video that I did a long while ago on navigating parts fishes. If you have some experience with other carbs in particular, you can say, hey, wait a minute, I was able to get individual parts for this carb. They're both Keihins in this case, and these fuel joints look the same. Even if you're not 100% sure, it's a hell of a lot cheaper to buy a couple of O-rings, even OEM, than it is this entire fuel joint, which is pretty expensive. So yeah, so we scored on that one. So we'll take that original one and put it back in there. So I'm confident that those will work. We won't have any fuel leaks. I'm not really worried about the vents, as I've said before. These O-rings, I'm pretty sure I have. Suzuki O-rings fit these, the little thin Suzuki ones, and I have a bunch of those, or at least I had. But like I said, I'm not too terribly concerned about them. They're insignificant. So, all right, off camera, what I did was I just took this air cut valve out, and it was not stuck. The other one seemed to be stucker, more stuck, but this one is definitely binding. It's not smooth. So I look, of course, at the rubber, and it's perfectly fine. And the end here is not terribly good either. I mean, just like the other one, it's kind of gnarled up. So yeah, we're going to clean this really good, and the rubber's fine on the diaphragm, so I'm confident that that's fine. But I don't think these were operating properly. And the other thing is, well, I'm going to need that again. So my original assumption on this whole thing was correct. I just thought that there was 4 individual air cut valves. There's an air cut valve that controls 2 carbs on each side. That's all I need it for, because this is how it looks like it works. Now, if you go look inside here and we put the flashlight, you can see inside the bore there's a hole that goes up, and it's in line with the with the hose, that hole. Okay, that's a vacuum port. Well, what happens with that vacuum port, obviously, is when this plunger is inside there, the narrower part of the plunger is presented to that hole. So that allows some sort of flow. From where exactly, I'm not sure, but it obviously allows a certain amount of flow. So again, when it's down like this and the spring tension's on it, we can actually simulate that. We can stimulate that, and it's blowing air through this hose, no problem. Now let's take this and we'll pull that back a little bit, and then we'll do the same thing with putting some vacuum on it and see how it behaves. Yeah, it nearly blocks it off 100%. It's very difficult to move any air through there. It's, again, my initial thoughts was correct on this, okay? My initial thoughts were correct. So this thing gets pressed down and then pulled back under vacuum. Through this port right here, you can see that this is the port that supplies it. It comes off the intake side of the carb. Where I was wrong was I thought this had something to do with the control. This is not the control, this is the result. So the control is over here, and through this little port where the O-ring is, which I gotta make sure I don't lose, it pulls the vacuum against the spring and moves that little plunger, the bigger part of the plunger, and blocks this off. And this carb over here, it's neighboring carb, it apparently hooks up directly into the spot that the airflow would normally be allowed or cut off if it had its own air cut valve. So that seems to be the way this works. So with that in mind, again, I was wrong and I was right. So I hope that doesn't confuse everybody, but you know, I'm learning as I go on some of these carbs that are kind of freaky. So yeah, I'll put that inside there. I'm going to need to clean all this before I put it back together, and we'll do number one as well. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that I was able to find all the O-rings basically that I need, and we kind of understand how this works now. And I think we can solve this problem by cleaning this up, placing the O-ring in the slow screw. We're going to open the slow screw at least to 3 turns on this configuration. 2 turns, no way. No bueno. And so I think we'll be able to solve it. When we pick back up, I'll have all the parts in. I may not film actually installing them because, you know, it's kind of boring. And we'll come back at that point or at a appropriate time, and then we'll pick it up to show you what where we're at and what the results are. All right, folks, we're back over here in the bench with the carbs from the ZRX-1200, and they are finally done, pretty much ready to go back on the bike. And I want to go over what I found and what I did. Well, the first thing I did was, I think I mentioned, I replaced all the float bowl gaskets with those ones from the Keihin kit, and they worked out really well. I really was happy I got 2 sets of those actually, so that worked out well. I mentioned that I was going to replace the O-rings in the pilot screws, which I did. Now, if you're interested in the part number for that, this is the part number for those tiny O-rings. They're from the ZX-10, probably other parts fishes, but they are most definitely proper size O-rings for these screws, these fuel screws. So again, there's a part number for it. I also found a couple of issues in regards to the jetting, or not jetting, but the cleanliness of the carbs and open jet circuits and so forth. The first one is on number 2 carb, which would be here, the emulsion tube was in pretty bad shape. So as far as gunky. So I cleaned that one up real well. The other carbs, the other 3, I did check them, and they just needed a really quick blast with some brake clean and wipe them down, and the holes were all open. But this guy was definitely pretty bad. Number 3, the air jet on the back of the carb for the slow circuit was completely blocked, completely clogged when I tried to flush it with brake clean when I had them all apart. And so I cleaned that out, and I verified all the circuits on all the carbs, including the enricher circuits, are all open and capable of flowing fluid. All right, so that was the things I found as far as that goes. As far as jetting goes, I think I mentioned that this had 35, number 35 pilot jets, or slow jets, which is stock. I did look it up. 35 is a stock jet, which is kind of unusual, I would find, in most cases when you have the pods and a low flow, that muzzy exhaust. Not all the time you have to change the slow jets. Sometimes they stay stock. Generally, when you have a radical change like that with the elimination of a factory air box and individual pods and a low flow exhaust, you're going to have to bump the slows up a little bit at least. Now, there were 35s. I probably could have gotten away with 38s. That's the next step up in the Keihins, but I only had 40s in stock. So I went from 35 to 40. So that is, you know, a pretty big jump on these, but we're going to try it and see what happens. These carbs are extremely easy to get off because it doesn't have an air box. So the only bitch is the throttle cables. They are a prick. You got to disconnect them from the actual throttle on the handlebar to get enough length to get the things disengaged from the actuation cam here, this guy here. That's what I mainly found as far as the jetting and cleanliness and so forth. I saw no need to take the diaphragm caps off because I can actuate the diaphragms, the slides rather, from each one, and they feel perfectly normal, and I can examine the jet needle, the diaphragm needles rather, and they look pretty good. As far as the seats go for the floats, I should mention that these particular carbs have pressed in float seats. So how I deal with those is I take some Brasso, and again, this is with everything all disassembled so I can flush it adequately afterwards. Take some Brasso on a cotton swab and go in there and ream them out, kind of polish them out, and then give them a good flush, make sure they're clean, blow them out with some compressed air, low pressure, and then you can pretty much guarantee they're going to seat pretty well. We're going to test that here in a minute because that relates to the next issue that I found. I'm going to spin them up like this to show you. Now here you can see I machined a new T for the main fuel inlet between all the carbs. So this is between 2 and 3, and of course the straight ones that I was explaining before that take the O-rings, which by the way, if you want that part number, is this part number here. The O-rings for these fuel joints that fit those are this number here, the 1004, 92055 1004. That's for the fuel joint O-rings. Again, this is a ZX10 part number, probably other models as well. So that worked out perfect as far as that goes. I think you saw earlier in the video here, I measured all that and I could tell that those O-rings would fit these because these fuel joints are the same exact joints as the ZX10. So I went and pressure tested this rack with this fuel tee in, which is the original fuel tee. And we'll go into the differences here in a second. As you can see, they are different. And I had a leak coming from one side. I don't remember if it was number 2 or number 3 carb, doesn't matter. So what I did was I sprayed a little bit of silicone spray along the edge, and then I could see a bubbling on one side. So we definitely had a leak. So I ended up having to replace all the O-rings. Luckily, I ordered 8 of them. Again, these guys here, because I was initially only going to do the 2 and then keep a set of 6 in stock, which typically would be 2, 4, and 6 in a normal setup. Well, as you can see in this particular fuel tee, that is way different, and you can see the O-rings are way different too. There's some tiny little O-rings that I don't have and I can't identify. Again, these are not broken out, the O-rings that is, on the parts fish. You have to buy the entire fuel tee. Now you can do that allegedly. It shows as sort of available on the Partzilla parts fish and other ones as well. But it's like available in 3 to 4 days or something like that. Typically when that happens, it may or may not be available. It's a 50-50 shot when it's listed that way, in my experience. I was thinking about, I may just order 2 of these because they're not expensive. They're like 24, 25 bucks or something, and then just keep them in stock because they are kind of a unique fuel tee. I have a couple other different ones as well, so I might just do that and see if I can actually get it. My fear was I'd order it and it would be a week, and then all of a sudden Partzilla or whomever else you inquire about it would say, oh, they're ultimately not available. So I said, screw it. I have some experience machining of fuel joints and fuel tees, so I decided to make one. Now I did film that, and I'm considering putting it out as a midweek machining video because it's a rather complicated fuel tee here, but I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to. But I'll just give you the overview here. You can see that it's double O-ringed on each side, and it has a little lip on the ends, which is for actually a fuel like a filter cap, the little caps that snap on. You typically see those on the inlets of where the float seats go on the inside of the carb. In other words, when the replaceable float seats, you take the float seat out and you put a little cap on them. Goes on the end of the fuel tee and that little lip right there that's made into it when they mold this plastic. So this is a fairly complicated part because of that. Not only do we have the two O-rings on each side, but those little lips there. So I ended up making one, as you can see, and it came out pretty well. I was able to snap those little fuel filters on the ends, no problem. And because I knew that these O-rings, or these bores rather, where the O-rings go, were the exact same diameter as these, and these were the ones that fit the ZX-10. I knew that if I went off my drawing that I made for the ZX-10 fuel joint and fuel tees that I made, or fuel tee and joints rather, I could just groove that at 88 thousandths wide and a certain depth and make it overall diameter. I actually made it a little bit bigger. It worked out pretty well as far as where the O-ring sits on the minor diameter of that. And then I put them in, and it works pretty well. So it's got a really good feel. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead, now that our carbs are upside down anyway, let's go ahead and pressure test this and see if it is actually going to work, because I haven't done that yet. So let's set up the pump here, the blood pressure cuff modified pressure tester. We'll pressure test the rack here and make sure it's all good. But I think this is going to work pretty well because it fits real well. And these go in pretty deep. You can see this one right here is really wide. It goes in way deep as opposed to the Keihins on the ZX-10, which was very shallow. So you had to get that overall length correct, and I added about 60 thou to the original one, so otherwise that would move back and forth. If you watch the ZX-10, or I should say that machining video on those particular ones, you understand what I mean. But this one's pretty long, so I had a little bit of latitude here, all right? So anyway, let's set it up and see what we got. All right, I think you can see the gauge from there, if I'm not mistaken. So let's pump her up and see what we can do. It held pressure fine when I did it initially with the old fuel tee in there. It was only because I had squirted a little bit of silicone on it that I actually saw that. Otherwise, I would have given it a pass. I'm gonna go to 5 PSI, and we'll see what we got. And you know what we can also do is just dribble a little of this in here to make sure that it's gonna be fine. It's not gonna hurt nothing. I mean, this wicks into the O-rings in there. It's not gonna hurt nothing at all. I mean, these O-rings are fuel rated because they're fuel tee and fuel joint O-rings. But in this particular scenario, using the old fuel tee, it was bubbling out like big time. So we got none of that now, and so it looks real well. We're holding 5 PSI, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So that proves that not only our fuel delivery, as far as this fuel, rail, if you want to call it, is good, and our floats and our float seats are good as far as the float valves go. And by the way, I also adjusted the floats. The floats were off. They were in a position where they would not be allowing the carbs to fill all the way. In other words, the floats were set too low. So I adjusted all of them to the service manual spec, and that all worked out real well. So I'm real happy with this right now. I think this thing's gonna run markedly better. I set the fuel screws at 3 turns. Remember, the originals were at 2. It may be just right, or because I bumped up the jetting a little bit, I'm not 100% sure about it. But I can get in there with my Motion Pro adjuster tool, the right angle adjuster tool, and get up there in situ and adjust these if necessary. And since I've taken them out and cleaned them and everything, they're easy to turn. So yeah. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, I did fix the issue that I suspected was the case with these air cut valves, the one on this side and one on number 1. I cleaned them up really well and polished them with some Brasso, that tip, and then cleaned out the little bore in there. There was just a fine, just a very thin coat of scale in those, which is just enough to bind it up. So now they move really, really freely. The vacuum hoses were just fine. I reused those. And so, yeah, so we're all ready to go. So I think the next clips you're going to see, I'll have them back in the bike. On this particular day I'm filming it, that will not be today because I have other things to do, but it'll be a mere few seconds for you, and we'll fast forward to that point. Fire it up, see how it runs. All right, folks, the moment we're all waiting for. They're back in, and I got fuel hooked up to it. I have not been able to test the TPS yet. There's a special procedure for this, and there's a couple other small issues as well. I'll try to remember to tell you about that here. I'd want to fire it up first and see. Well, anyway, without further ado, let me set you up, and I got it fuel hooked up already. Just got to turn it on and go over a few things, see how it runs first, and then we'll do that. Fuel is on, ignition, a little bit of enricher, and my finger on the kill button just in case. Contact. Runs a lot better, no question about it. She still has a little bit of decel, or when you let off the throttle, pop. I don't know if we're gonna get that out of there at all. But what I gotta do first is synchronize it. I gotta check the synchronization on it. Well, wait just one cotton picking second. I definitely am gonna, definitely gonna do a synchronization on it, but somebody forgot something. Number 2 carb is wide open to the air. I forgot to plug that. That's where the petcock goes. That's why I hate these vacuum petcocks. Let me slap a plug on it, at least temporary, and then we'll see what it sounds like. I bet you it's gonna run even better. That's amazing. I got one carb with a vacuum problem, and it runs that well. So maybe it's indicative of a much better result than what I'm thinking right now. Well, I might as well just use the synchronizer to plug it off. Oh yeah. Oh, a lot better. Oh yeah. Good. I need to do one a little bit. I don't think we're going to get rid of all of it. Well, aside from tweaking the synchronization a little bit, one's a little bit light on that side, so we'll crank that up a little bit off camera, and then I want to do a test on this TPS, but it would be too much to do on camera and the length of this video already, but essentially you have to put some sort of jumper wire. It's a special tool that Kawasaki has that the dealers probably don't even have. And then you can tap into the wires while it's plugged in. Normally you check these just as a resistance check at throttle close, in other words, wherever it's set at idle, and then throttle wide open on 2 different sets of the wires, like for example, the yellow and the, that's a yellow down in there actually, the yellow and the blue, and then the blue and the black, and whatever the case may be. And that is the case. You do have to test the wires on this one similarly, but you have to do it, like I said, with it plugged in, the engine warmed up, and the key on, but not the engine running. So I'm gonna do that off camera, and because I made a little harness for it. Here is that right here. So I got some bare spots in the middle where I can tap my meter into. Anyway, I'll do that off camera like I said, but it does smell a little on the rich side. So the 40s are probably a little too big, and that's probably why they left the 35s in, because whatever kit they used, if they used a kit, probably just said to leave them, and that's probably correct. I think I'm gonna order some 38s because I don't have any. These carbs gotta come out again anyway, because this is one thing that my producer is supposed to remind me of, is this throttle cable's broken, this stupid plastic thing. This is actually a replacement one that was not broken until I started to install it. These are the stupidest design I've ever seen. Why they chose to use this dumbass thing that's got the plastic curly thing or the curved thing that's a little channel for the cable to ride, and this very thin part right there that as soon as you crank the handlebars to the left, these are where it's supposed to run, as far as I can tell, it's going to angle that and snap a new one right off. So this is really stupid. But I'm going to go ahead and replace the throttle cable. I thought that one was going to work, but unfortunately it broke as well. Yeah, so like I said, I got to pull the carbs anyway to do that. It's impossible to get throttle cables without taking the carbs off. So I think when I do that, I'm going to drain them, and I'm going to rejet it down to 30. What did I say, 38? Because the 40s I think are a little too big. So, but I don't want to put 35s in there. I think 35s are a little too lean for decel stuff. So we'll bump it up 38s, and I'll just order a set. So there's a lot of other stuff that's going to get done on this bike besides the tires. You notice that there's no front brake cable or hoses anymore. The customer wanted me to pull those, and he's going to pick them up. All the brakes, the front and rear. That's all the hoses, including the clutch hose, which is part, rubber, regular lined rubber and steel. I got them all packaged up, ready for them to go. So we can't take it for a test drive, obviously, because of that. There's no brakes, no clutch, no nothing. Yeah. So like I said, there's a lot more I got to do on this thing. And by the way, when I took these banjos off, oh my God, the crustiness that's inside here. I mean, take a look at that fluid right there. That looks like iced tea, like well brewed. So yeah, these all have to be flushed out with new fluid and cleaned up. To clean up the banjo is a mess. And the other thing I just found when I was tuning this, trying to adjust the idle, and doing a classic reach around over here, when somebody did a factory delete on the airbox, they left the crankcase vent wide open. When I reached around to get at the knob here, I felt a puffing, and I went, what the hell is that? Sure as hell, I didn't notice it before. That's just wide open. That can't be that way. If you wash the bike, which luckily I haven't done, I haven't hit this with a hose or anything, but I probably wouldn't have noticed that. And so we're gonna have to come up with probably some sort of a hose that goes over, and one of those little filters. I'll have to go to Auto Parts and see what they got, or I'll go online and order some. But that has got to be capped off, or allowed to breathe rather, but at least protected. So that's pretty bad. Yeah, so that we got to do all that stuff, but you know, we need to touch these filters up a little bit more with some more of the oils. Like I said, this has got to come off anyway, the carbs that is, because again, I got to do the other stuff, and I'll put a new cable on it, and I'm going to throw some 38s in it, readjust it, recheck stuff, and then we'll send it down the road once all the other stuff's done. And the tires, I got the tires ordered. I ordered Continental something or others for it. They were pretty expensive. Of course, all tires are expensive now. So I'm probably not going to include anything on the TPS, throttle positioning sensor deal. We're going to be shutting this video off and concluding here very shortly. Yeah, so here we go. The throttle positioning sensor was absolutely spot on. There's 3 tests you do on it. They're all DC voltage tests. I'm not going to go into it because this video is long enough as it is. But on all 3 tests, between the blue, yellow, and black wires on that, perfect. No problem whatsoever. So I wanted to just make sure that that was good. As far as the decel popping goes, I don't think we're going to get it any better than it is right now, because I got it pretty much almost dead nut synchronized. We'll revisit that. I'm going to do it off camera. I doubt there'll be another video on this bike at a later time because, like I said, I got to pull the carbs, put a throttle cable in. I'm going to bump those jets down to 38. I'm going to go in right now and order those from Niche Cycle Supply up in St. Pete. Maybe some other ones that I think I need as well, and just put them in stock. But for this, it'll be 38, so I'm going to put those in. Really quick summary. We're at 2 turns on the fuel screws with the 40 jets and the 130 mains. I didn't change the mains. They were the ones that were in there. But I think 40s are a little too big ultimately. Even with 2 turns on the fuel screws, it still smells a little rich. It does not blow any smoke at all, like, you know, fuel smoke, even when you hammer it. So I'm going to bump them down to 38s. I just have a feeling I'm going to order them this afternoon from Niche Cycle and then get those coming in. The other thing I wanted to tell you was, I said earlier in the video that thank God these are not the older style carbs that require service fuel level like the old VMs. Well, guess what? These require a service fuel level. Never seen a set of CVKs like that require a service fuel level like that. So I was like, you got to be kidding me. So yeah, what I ended up doing was I ended up checking it in situ because I don't have a fixture to keep them at the proper angle. And sure as hell, I checked number 1 and I was way high. I go, I got to pull these off and readjust them all. So I bumped the float levels down lower in the carb to reduce the level of fuel in the carb, and I got them within 2 mil, about 2 mil. It's 1.5 mil from the edge of the carb body where it meets the float bowl, plus or minus half a mil. So I got it about 2. That's fine. So yeah, that'll be fine as far as fuel level go. But I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I got to deal with another one of these service fuel levels. I'm getting sick of it. There won't be any more video on this bike because I got to do brake work. You know, as I mentioned before, a bunch of crud in the brake system once he brings the new lines over. Some sort of colored braided thing, you know, green. I don't know what he's doing. But we'll get them all going, get the clutch, everything bled back up. I hope to hell I don't have to rebuild any brakes, but these are 6 piston front brakes on each. And yeah, I don't want to deal with that, but we'll see what happens. All right, so speaking of happens, that's about all that happened on this. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And I hope you're happy with this video. If you are, do me a favor, stick around because I got another job coming in I think you're going to really enjoy. It's an 1986. I'm not going to say what it is as far as brand, but it is a motorcycle and it's big. It'll be a big sucker on the lift here. I think you'll really enjoy the content. So you stick around for that, stick around for other stuff. Subscribe, like, share. Those 2 things in particular help me out immensely. Ring the bell if they even have a bell, I don't know. And then you get notified when I put more crap like this up. So until that time, as always, don't just repair, restore. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next video.